providers, and worked on all sides: voice, video, data, cable TV, Metro E, all those different services. I never spent any time though working on SS7. There was always like one person who knew SS7, and they took care of that piece. So I was really curious about how SS7 worked, and how SS7 was getting hijacked, doing the SMS hijacking, stealing people's two-factor authentication. So I wanted to dig into it more, just about how do you get into the SS7 and how does SS7 work, because I was curious about it myself, about the details of the protocol. And so my approach on this talk is to show you how the SS7 works, high-level architecture, and then we're going to dive into how someone may get access to the telco network so that they can get into the SS7 network, and then some of the hacks that are happening once someone gets into the SS7 network, and how they go and intercept calls, intercept SMS messages, go and find location, etc., and how all that could go down. So SS7, if you're not familiar with SS7, think of SS7 as the BGP for the PSTN, the public switch telephone network. It's the protocol that allows all the voice switches around the world to talk. If you're using your cell phone, if you're calling from your landline to another city, if you're doing text messaging, caller ID, 911, etc., you're using SS7 protocol. Now, outside of the U.S., they call it C7. And it's been around. AT&T created this back in '75. It's been around a long time, and like with a lot of these technologies, kind of like what you see with like BGP today, with all the BGP hijacking, it was designed and built between all the telcos to interoperate with open trust relationships. Everybody trusted everybody in the telco world back when this was all built, and so now obviously we got security problems. Now, a few of the key terms we'll talk about here. There's nodes in the network called the signal transfer point. That signal transfer point, think of it as a router for the voice network, for the PSTN network. And it not only does it route the messages between the telcos in the PSTN network, but it also has filtering capabilities. Just like a router has ACL, access control list, the STP has filtering capabilities. Now, and then you also, when you talk to someone about SS7, you'll hear about the service switching point. It's the SSP. That service switching point they're talking about, think of that if you're in an enterprise, you have your PBX. You might have, say Cisco Call Manager. When in the telco world, they have what they call Class 5 and Class 4 switches. And Class 5 switches, basically, think of it as a PBX that supports hundreds of thousands of customers. And there used to be those Class 5 switches would fill up a large room, but now they've got it consolidated down to soft switches where it's just a couple servers clustered together can do everything in software. And then you got the SCP, the service control point, and that's the database that has all the knowledge about all the users, the 800 numbers, the mobile subscribers, the calling cards, all those services. And that's the service control point, the SCP, that provides that service. Now, when you look architecturally, this is a real high-level architecture representation. In the center, you have your STPs that are going to route. That's the backbone of the SS7 network. And you have what they call B links, which are the telecommunication links. Think of it as your traditional TDM circuits, and when depending on the functionality, the features that are running across those TDM links, those time division multiplex links, then they have different names for them. So between your STPs, it's called B links. Think of the B links as your backbone links between the different STPs in the SS7 network. And then you have the C links, and if the network is large enough, they may cluster the STPs together with C links. And then you have A links, and A links go and connect out to your SSP, your Class 5, Class 4 tandem switch, or your Class 5 switches providing all the call services, or the SCP, the service control point, where the database is. It may use A links. And those A links are basically T1s, or if you're in a different part of the world outside the US, maybe E1s. And then if you have a need for a lot more density because of the load on the network, they may have E links, which is basically serves the same function as the A links. Now, back, I'm an old school telco guy, network person. It used to be before, back when modems were still popular, that a ISP, if they had a large enough volume of modem traffic, that they ISPs or even an enterprise, if they had a large enough number of PRIs coming into the enterprise for voice calls, that they may get 8 links instead of using PRIs to be able to save money. But nowadays, an enterprise is nobody's using modems anymore. So an enterprise is not going to have 8 links terminating into it. It's going to be SIP trunks. Everybody's doing SIP trunks these days. But just some history there. Know where we're coming from. On the cellular network, break down some of the functionality we have in the cell phone network before we start getting into how to attack the network and how the network is being manipulated. So some of the functionality over at the top, you've got what you call the operations support subsystem. I don't show it, but over to the right of that could be the business support system, the BSS. There's additional trust relationships there, but the open operations support subsystem think of that as like the network management automation for the network. That's where all the automation and health and status type operations, provisioning, that's all happening out of that operations support subsystem block, where you'd have servers running applications that can drive everything. And you drop down into the mobile switching center, and that's where you get into the mobile switching center is going to be like the soft switch, the call processing box for the cell network. And then you're going to go over to the HLR. It's going to be the home location registrar, and that's what's going to keep up with what cell phone mobile devices are owned by that network. And then you have the authentication center that is going to authenticate devices on the network. And then you got the visitor location registrar, and that's where that database, that system, keeps up and processes the calls for visitors when you're roaming across different networks. That's where the visitor location register comes into play. And then you got the equipment identity register that keeps up with whether equipment is authorized, whether it's been stolen, what have you. And that MSC has connections to the PSTN, to the SS7. And then you get over to the left, and you got the base station controller. And the base station controller is what is going to control all the cell sites. You manage the radios and manage handoffs when you're roaming and going between towers. It'll manage the handoffs. It'll manage the call processing and keeping up with where mobile devices are on the network, paging devices, etc., and reporting what's happening out in the field back up to the mobile switching center. And like I said, I'm an old school network guy, so I like to see Wireshark packet. I like to see PCAPs. But here's the thing with SS7: if you go and start looking at a traditional SS7 network, you're not going to go and drop Wireshark on those networks, because it's a T1, E1 type signal, and you're going to have a specialized device. It's not Ethernet. That's what I'm getting at. So you're going to have a specialized device, typically called a T-Bird, that can go in and tap the frames off of a telco signal. And but you can go and import those frames that you can capture with a specialized device, say from Agilent or the T-Bird, and import that into Wireshark. And that's what we see here. And I'm showing you. We don't have IP addresses in this S7 packet, but you can see the phone numbers of the calling and the called numbers here. But things are progressing, and we're moving to, everything's moving to an IP network, and so is SS7. But for backward compatibility, we're having to bring all the old features and capabilities of SS7 forward with all, whether it's 3G, 4G, now 5G, it's all going to be backward compatible, because you got parts of the world that have not upgraded their networks yet. And so everything's got to be able to communicate still. But we're still going to, you can see here though that we've got SS7, the call processing, encapsulated into IP. And if it's an IP, you can ping it. If you can ping it, you can target it. But here's the place where I live in the network, and here's where the good juicy stuff is, and this is where there's the surface of attack that's not talked about a whole lot. This is where, if someone wants into the telecommunications critical infrastructure backbone, this is how they're going to get in. What we have is the different layers. At the very top, this is where the brains of the operation is. You got your NOC, your SOCs, you You got your provisioning, your cable TV head-in. I spent a lot of years building cable TV into the telco networks where you could, flip in your channels. You're changing channels that are mapped to multicast IP addresses. So when you hit your clicker, you're actually changing IP multicast groups. And so all that's being brought in. And then you have your lawful intercept. I have represented over on the left. That's where you can do an IP-based wiretap. And so your telco service provider, they have the ability to support CLIA and the Patriot Act. And if they don't, if they get served a warrant, my understanding is, I've never had to be a part of that. My understanding is if every warrant, every request from law enforcement that gets provided to the telco, if they cannot support that warrant, it's a $10,000 a day fine per warrant request. I can guarantee you they have the capability to tap all your phone and data transactions. So I did a presentation a long time ago about this. One of my thoughts is that's a real good target if you know that the lawful intercept capabilities on the network, it's there to support law enforcement, but if a bad guy can get a hold of it, isn't there some juicy information there to go and use? I believe there was something published where that might have been used over off of a class 5 switch a few years ago. Well, what you do is we go down, we break down into the center of the network. We have where the carriers got their telco transport networks. You got your DWDM. You might have some legacy SONET SDH, which is going away. You got your DWDM. It may be passive or active managed, what they call ROADM, where you can dynamically provision the wavelengths on the fiber. And then you work down into whatever kind of access network they have, whether they're using PON or active Ethernet. Maybe they've got some legacy DSL. Your cellular backhaul, all out there providing maybe some T1, E1 services still out there to the edge of the network. But here's the key thing about this slide from a security standpoint. You see all those boxes and all those call outs. Those are all different vendors. And when all this new technology gets dropped into this infrastructure, the vendors all require and need remote access into that network to support the infrastructure. And so the same engineers are implementing this stuff everywhere, and not everybody's being consistent. And some people are putting in bypasses like multi-home Linux boxes, maybe not using two-factor authentication, using the same username passwords everywhere, and it opens up a huge surface of attack for what I call the VPT, the vendor persistent threat, to have remote access into these networks and to get in. And that's like I said, I spent 15 years building these networks, and I was the guy that was getting called after some vendor got popped and was the soft switch was getting taken over. And the only reason they would know is because some bank over in Europe would call them and tell them to cease and desist attacking me with your soft switch, your phone service that they just put in, or some other one of the other network management boxes in here that was being used to attack Europe. That was usually typically their IDS. So if you wanted to go and if you start wanting to go and if a bad guy wants to go and start thinking about how to attack these networks, and you want to look at it from a blue team standpoint, make sure your stuff's buttoned up. Here's a strategy if you want to go after the telco service provider. How I would look at it, maybe you're going in and doing authorized pen tests, authorized audits. I spent a great deal of time doing that in the past. Here's some things to consider. Go out when you're out there doing your recon. Figure out what the vendors are. They put a lot of press releases out bragging about what vendors they put into the network. Whether it's a Cisco, whether it's a Juniper, whoever the Meta Switch, whatever the vendors are that they decided to use to build out the network, and then you can go and reverse engineer the architecture based on all the open source information that's available to you, and figure out what the key trust relationships are in that network, how it all melds together. So once you finally get a handhold, maybe you get a web shell or something, you know how to start pivoting into that network. And what I highly recommend is to go in and take out information and then develop yourself an attack tree and work through all the logic so you can be very methodical and effective once you get authorized to start testing the network. Now here's a scenario. This is a real world scenario I saw unfold a few times when I was doing service provider consulting. You have a voice switch network, This is one way. This is one way to get into and get access to SS7. Now, the networks that I worked on, when they got hacked, SS7 wasn't ever the target. The target was always to go and there was just people scanning for open SSH services to hack the box, to turn around and use the capability to do a hairpin turn and go and try to hack a bank. That's just what I ran into in my career. But the folks who got access in this scenario here, they had access to the voice infrastructure, and they could have gone and done SMS attacks, any kind of SS7 attack they wanted to do. Could have took out the whole voice service for the whole community, what they could have done. But in this scenario, what you have is had two different vendors represented here. Had a vendor for the transport network and a vendor for the soft switch network that was put in brand new boxes. And in both cases, these vendors, what they would do is drop in a Linux box, multi-home, one leg to the internet, one leg into their management plane, management access network, and totally bypass all of the security that the internet guys had put in place. Because what you run into is politics, because the vendors would go, they had a relationship with the voice people who had been there since the original footers to the facilities had been, when it was built, had been there. And then you had, the internet folks that nobody liked to talk to, that understood this IP and understood the hacker threats. And so what happened is the politics would come in play, and the vendors could go and get what they want and be able to drop in a multi-home Linux box that bypassed the firewall security. And instead of locking down trust relationships about what IPs could even find that SSH service, it'd be open to the world, and of course they'd have used the same user accounts and passwords everywhere at all their customer sites. So somebody would be able to jump on that Linux box and get access to either the transport network, the core backbone transport network that everything depends on, or into the soft switch network. So this is one vector that I've personally seen that would get you into the SS7 network. Now there's another scenario I've seen happen. This would be a way that you could take over the telco. Now, how this is based on a network I built. Had a customer wanted to move from 60 frame relay sites across the U.S. Wanted to move from telco A to telco B. It was, a lights out managed frame relay service in this case. Wanted to get it all upgraded and get a better deal on their services. So telco A, when they lost the contract and we started migrating the network over, the project manager looked at his Excel spreadsheet, I guess, and decided it wasn't economical didn't make sense in the spreadsheet to ship all the end of sale equipment back to the home office and get it destroyed. They abandoned over 60 something routers across the country. And then my customer, a couple business transactions later, they over doubled in size, and they're like, hey, Coggin, we're going to double the size of this network, but you're not going to sell me a bunch of routers again. Me being a hardcore Cisco guy, he knew what was coming. I was about to go and give him some quotes and sell him a truckload of routers. He's like, no, we've got all these old routers. These things are going to be recovered. They don't want them back. They've abandoned them. They don't want them back. We're not going to return them. So we're going to use the old stuff, because we're just doing IBM green screen, a little internet, a little email out at these remote sites. Didn't need a whole lot. So lo and behold, you go and do password recovery on all that equipment that it's abandoned. And what is in there? Everything. All the access control list, all the passwords, all the router policies, all the AAA radius information, TACACs, all the passwords, everything left in this equipment out here abandoned. Made my jaw drop. Of course, we didn't do anything with it. We just got rid of all that and refreshed the boxes and blew in our own configs. But this is a real case. But as a strategy to go back and take over that telco, you take all this information that we got that they just gave us because it looked good in the spreadsheet. You could take all that information very easily and go and do recon on, say, LinkedIn, etc., so other social media, and come up with a good strategy to go and hit the field engineers maybe the knock sock guys and be able to go fish them and be able to find your way based on all the intel that you gathered here of knowing a lot of the boxes in the knock, and be able to pivot your way in and be able to do a surgical strike against their network, because they've given you so much detailed information that you don't have to go and do port scanning and all. You just got to get that initial handhold and go direct in and attack them, and then pivot over, say, into their provisioning system and work your way down into the SS7 network and other parts of the infrastructure. Now, here's what's going. So now we've talked about this. How to get, gave a couple of examples how to get in access into the telco network. Now, what are they actually doing? The first thing you're going to do, say if you're targeting someone, say we're targeting Daryl back here. We want to get Daryl's. We're going to go after Daryl, and we might have his phone number. We may know what his provider is because of what part of the country he's in. We can get the STP code information. So what we can do, if we've got access into this telco network and we've got a little bit, we've got the phone number, we got the STP code, we could go and forge messages, go and craft some messages as a SMS center box, craft some messages, send it up to the mobile switching center, over to the HLR, the home location registrar, and find out all of his information, like what is his HLR, what is the VLR, the visitor location registrar, and the key thing is we want to get the MC information. We want to get the MC code for his phone, the MC ID for his SIM card and stuff, so that we can go and start directly targeting him. And so that's the first thing we're going to do. We're going to go and query and start trying to get the MC, the HLR, the VLR, and all that information. And since we got access to the SS7 network, and there's a big trust relationship in the SS7 network, similar to like BGP. The BGP is being fixed now. People are starting to lock down the security of BGP more between peer networks. But SS7, there's still that same similar trust relationship. So we can go out there and query it. Now, once we have that information, we've got the cell phone number, we've got the MC, we know the visitor location registrar, we know the home location registrar. Now we're ready. So now we can go and craft messages, and we can send messages up from say the telco that we've got access to, and we can go and send messages up into their toward the mobile switching center, which would send it over to this home location registrar and find out where they're located. There's a feature called anytime interrogation. Anytime interrogation has been turned off on most of the cell networks, but there's always going to be one that's some that's left it on that haven't done their due diligence. But the anytime interrogation, if we got this access and we can go craft messages, send it into the cell phone network, we can go find out where someone is located. We can go and send this message up into the MSE to the HLR, and it'll go and send the message over to the visitor location registrar, and then it will go out there and send a request out to the base station controller and find and ping that phone and find where they are out on the network, and then return that information to the attacking system, and where they know where they're at. But like this one, this vulnerability is going away as more people turn it off. But what is still out there, if you have this access because of the trust relationships that exist, you can still go in and craft messages, act like you're a home location registrar, for example, or mobile switching center, and send queries up into the network, up to the HLR, and say where is it? We're looking for this. We're looking for this phone. Where are they at? And so it'll go query them. We want to send a call, and then so it'll go up to the HLR, go to the VLR, the visitor location registrar, and then on out to the base station controller, and find out and ping that phone and return that location information to whoever requested it to know where you're at, so you can be tracked. Now, what's more interesting to me, and what's been all in the news, is the SMS. This is where it's very similar. If you can do all this manipulation, you can craft all these packets and send messages into the cell phone network. I gave you a few examples of how you might be able to do that. And if you're able to go and communicate SS7 from the access that you've gained into the telco up into the global SS7 cloud, then you're doing all these queries. Why can't we do all the other layer 2, layer 3 man-in-the-middle attacks that we can do? We can do the same kind of man-in-the-middle attack with SS7. where we can go in and spoof, say, the mobile switching center, and send updates and tell the home network, say, hey, we've roamed over to this network now. We're no longer in Alabama. We're in Louisville, and how that way we update the home location registrar, say, for our network. Anybody that starts trying to make calls or send text messages, it'll be rerouted up here to Louisville. And then we got the option is to decide whether we want to forward it or just capture the text message and drop it. But if we forwarded it on, the end user would never know, the end target would never know that we intercepted it, and the code didn't work for them because it had already been used at one time. So it makes it easy enough to happen. A few things to consider with SS7. Like I said, I spent 15 years dealing with the telco service providers and working on rolling out 100% IP Ethernet network for the telcos, where they were ripping out the old TDM network and going to a network that was either based where everything was running over fiber and Ethernet or DSL in the initial phases, and it was 100% IP for the most part. Everything running over Ethernet, and I never had a conversation with anyone about testing those networks. We tested all the other components of the security. It did security architecture reviews of the internet piece, the business enterprise piece, but nobody ever hired us to look at the voice piece. I think that's some low-hanging fruit. You guys that work for consultants, I think that's a piece of business to go pick up with the service providers when you're out there talking to your critical infrastructure customers, to go after this piece, because probably nobody's been there and tried to assess that. And along those same lines, I put a lot of firewalls, VPN, two-factor authentication in telcos, but I never was involved with putting that stuff into the voice network. So again, if you're out there, if you're a network systems integrator, you're a consultant, you're out there trying to do good for your customers, trying to improve the posture of networks, here's some low-hanging fruit for you. And now when you start talking about the SS7, it's a different type of firewall. You're not selling a Checkpoint, Cisco, Juniper firewall. I mean, there's different vendors that specialize in the SS7 firewalls. Now, a lot of the networks, I assume, because we never had a firewall conversation, are using the filtering capabilities on their STPs. I'm hoping that's the case. I'd love to go back and get back into those networks again and have those kind of conversations. So again, if you're a part of these networks, you need to be auditing the SS7 network, not just going and focusing on the data, the internet piece and the transport piece of the networks, but go and dig into the voice services of the network. How's that all being secured, and specifically drill down into the vendors of how the vendors are getting in, and make sure the vendors are doing two-factor authentication. They're not just going and reusing the same passwords across all their customers, at least not on your network. Because I'm serious. I've seen a lot of networks get hacked this way over the years, where the vendors just use the same username passwords everywhere. It was just easy again. Not to mention the defaults. And again, and just like the data networks, you need to go and get visualization and instrumentation on those networks and be able to know what's happening, who's accessing those networks, and where the traffic is flowing from the data standpoint. I got a few pages of references if you want to dig into this, a few good books and stuff. But that's pretty much it. Anybody got any questions? Yeah. I can't hear you. Can you? Right. I have not looked at the dual voice solution, so I can't speak to it. But Darryl? Yeah. Yep. Yep. I have not on the telco side. I have, as far as the data infrastructure, the transport network, and the internet infrastructure. I've not looked at it on the voice infrastructure piece, but what I traditionally find is the same thing that you've run into in the enterprise, where it's S&P version 1, maybe 2, lot default, almost always default read only, maybe a modified community private string. Uh, Maybe there's ACLs, but if there's ACLs in place, it's probably spoofable. You probably can craft SNMP and spoof it. No. Right. Well, that's just a matter of walking the MIBs. But I haven't, from the SS7 standpoint, I have not done it to the SS7 infrastructure. I have not personally tested SS7 infrastructure. I think somebody needs to, because like I said, I spent a lot of years working on those nets, and it was never a conversation. And I look back and I'm like, wow, we really need to go back and look at all that. But what we run into is there's a lot of politics. In my experience, that the internet folks, the data folks, knew they needed to test. They needed to go and check on the posture of the network, get somebody else to look at it and get help. But on the voice side, it was kind of like SCADA, and SCADA, you just don't mess. They don't let you touch it until that person who runs it retires. Yeah. Well, they may have been very advanced, but they didn't have to use very advanced techniques, because they were just doing SSH brute force, and SSH brute force worked for them. Now, they may have been, ninjas, could have been nation state, but they didn't have to show any advanced skills that were my experience. The vendors were just throwing out open SSH daemons and using guessable passwords, or using the same passwords that bad guys may have obtained through a phishing attack or something that they may have discovered, and were able to just start knocking out customer networks. The experiences I had that I saw, they were just turning it into a bot, part of their effort to break into banks and stuff. That's just what I saw. There's no telling what other people have seen. I can only imagine what other folks have done. I would imagine other more sophisticated organizations probably have gotten in and hardened the systems better, so to keep other people out. And they're probably still using them today. Yeah, that's interesting. Really, I'd like to learn more about that when we get done. That's cool. Any more questions? I appreciate y'all taking time to show up for my talk today. Thank y'all. If you want the slides, I'll give you all the slides. So just give me a shout if you'd like them.